Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a lineup of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into those encounters, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far, far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been a very superstitious person. For lack of a better word, she's not religious, but she does believe in a lot of paranormal stuff. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo and her father was Irish. Either way, she had never been anywhere east of Montana and grew up in Nevada. One year when I was in grade school, we went to visit her. Most of the visit was pretty uneventful, typical boring old people stuff. Except she always kept her curtains drawn shut and would always peek out of the window. When someone asked what she was doing, she would simply reply, "Yanadalushi is watching me." This went on for nearly the entire visit until a few days before we were to leave. My grandma and my then baby brother, he is now 19, were in the front yard that evening planting flowers when all of a sudden my grandmother starts shouting, "Insert little brother's name here. Get away from that creature, it's not safe." Of course, being in Nevada, we all assumed that my brother had found a scorpion or a rattlesnake. So we all run outside to see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard was a large, black, Great Dane-sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with an intensity I had never seen before. It looked at us, gave us a little huff, and bounded off. I don't remember if it moved unusually fast or not, but I do remember it had really deep yellow eyes. When my mother asked my grandmother what had happened, she kept repeating, "The Yanadalushi has found me." She had moved a couple of weeks after that. Today's second encounter. I'd like to share something that my wife, I, and our 34-year-old daughter saw about 4 weeks ago in a very desolate part of northeast Florida, 3 miles north of Ewell. On a 2-lane road, Route 17, traveling north 5 miles from the Georgia-Florida line near St. Mary's River. It was 10:30 p.m. We had just finished dinner at the Ferdinand Beach. I had a glass of wine and was driving. Our daughter is 34 and did not drink as she is expecting. My wife was in the back seat after having 2 glasses of wine, traveling 45 miles an hour about 200 feet behind another car. Road was straddled by a berm on either side, about 5 yards, dense and tall forest on both sides. Florida Forestry Management area, the upright car's headlights reflecting on what I first thought were 2 people, walking on the side of the left berm. I turned my head. In a second or so, my car started to come up on them. They were no humans or creatures I had ever seen before. First one I came upon turned her whole body, and it was facing me straight on, about 6 feet 2 inches or so, and about 300 pounds, standing straight on 2 legs, light-colored fur with long, dark brown hair on top. Massive shoulders and a massive head with long hair. The second one was walking with a very long gait, same color and same kind of hair, but this one must have been 6'8" or taller, weighing about 400 pounds. As soon as we passed them, it only took us about 1.5 seconds. Our daughter screamed, "Oh my God, did you see it?" I said, "Yeah, I saw 2 creatures." She said she only saw one. She saw the smaller one. We both gave the exact description to each other. My wife said she saw 2 figures and could not describe anything else. Over the next 20-plus seconds, we talked about it and said, "Let's go back." Our daughter said, "No way, I don't want to be like those guys in the commercial looking for Sasquatch." So we drove on. We drove to our house in Georgia on the St. Mary's River, and I looked it up. I confirmed what I saw. I told some close friends. They know that I am a former military officer and lieutenant colonel, Jag, a lawyer, for more than 30 years. My daughter is also a lawyer. They said laughingly, "You must have seen some guys playing commando at 10:30 p.m. Jokingly, I was also told some new recruits for the offensive line at Georgia or the Gators. I had an interview the other day with a former wildlife officer in the Everglades, an individual with a master's in wildlife management with education from Duke and the University of Florida. He said he came upon traces of those things in the Everglades and said, "You probably saw them." So, on this Sunday morning, I leave you with this story and advice. If you happen to come upon one of these types of creatures, take a photo in the 1 or more seconds that you have before they disappear. And if you don't believe it now, all I can say is Google the Florida skunk ape and recent sightings in the Everglades. Today's third part of the upload. I truly believe a cover-up is going on. Last September I was fishing at a state park here in Georgia. I had been on this lake many times before, having recently taken fishing as a hobby. Met an older guy here who liked to go out on his kayak, not to fish, but just to have fun, I guess. We became friends, and he told me a few times when he was out on the lake, kids he thought were hiding in the woods throwing rocks at him whenever he stayed out after dark. I never thought anything of it other than stupid kids. He said the rocks never hit him, but some of them were pretty good-sized rocks, but he was never harmed. Dropped my boat in at the ramp at around 3 p.m. and started fishing at the far part of the lake as usual. Caught several fish at various locations around the lake, including a pretty good-sized cat. Time got away from me, and I was quite a bit away from the boat ramp when the sun went down. As I got close to the ramp, I could hear fish splashing in the water in what you would call a cul-de-sac right next to the boat ramp. Fishing by boat at this state park was only till sunset, and I was way past that time where my boat should have been out of the water. Thoughts on catching the big one had me trolling over to where I heard the fish splashing, and I threw a line in. About this time, I heard some knocking, like someone was hitting a tree with a baseball bat 3 times. It was close, I guess 50 yards in the forest right in front of me. First thought that came to mind was those kids that were throwing rocks, trying to scare my elderly friend who kayaks at the lake was now trying to scare me. So I grabbed my emergency paddle and banged on the side of my Pelican Bass Raider boat a few times to let them know I was not going to be an easy target. As soon as I finished the last bang, I heard a 3 knock from the woods behind me, really far off in the distance. I really couldn't tell the distance-wise. Then 4 knocks from in front of me are the same distance as before. Immediately following the last set of knocks, it sounded like an army squad descending upon me from the woods, leaves rustling, branches breaking as my location was being rushed by at least several different creatures. I am ex-military sniper and spent many months in the Amazon jungle in the 90s. Can't speak of that, but fear has never been an option for me. And never in my life have I ever felt fear like I did that night. I dropped my rod into the water, hit reverse on my trolling motor at the highest setting, and ran the boat into some branches that were jutting up out of the lake from a submerged tree. Stuck, I tried to regain my composure, grabbed my flashlight, and shined it into the forest toward the tree line. There was this hairy ape with a face like the picture of a pre-man of Darwin's theory staring at me. I dropped the flashlight into the boat and gunned it to the ramp. When the boat hit the ramp, I jumped out and ran full throttle to my truck and sat there till 9:30 p.m. hoping the forest employee would come through to do a final check that everyone had cleared the lake. No one ever came, so I mustered up the courage to back my truck up and load my boat. there were no noises from the forest, but it was deafeningly quiet, and I felt like I was being watched. Without securing my boat, I got out of there. I called the state park line the next day to report it, but got nowhere with the employee on the line. I felt insulted and asked if I was drinking, and was told that it was probably a herd of deer or my imagination got the best of me. There are families that rent cabins and hike the trails at this state park, and I worry that someone will get hurt by these creatures that inhabit the woods here. But my account has just been brushed off under the rug. Today's fourth part of the upload. Okay, to start this off, I want to say this is not my experience. I have a friend who is in the Marine Corps and I went through basic with. He has asked me to keep his identity secret, so therefore we'll be calling him Lance Corporal Smith. So less than a month ago, my friend was in Northern California for sniper exercise. It was a 3 exercise, and the objective was to reach the nearby base without being spotted or captured. For realism purposes, there were enemy soldiers, which were just other American soldiers. So my friend gets dropped off in the middle of the forest with his rifle and compass. Before leaving, the transport team said the base was due southwest. So my friend waits for the sound of the helicopter to fade away into the silence and begins his trek. It was a live fire exercise, so he had with him a loaded rifle, most commonly known as an intervention. Then he says fast forward to the night of the second day. He was within 1 mile of the base. He was up in a tree, and from the tree he can see the clearing where the base is located. He thinks to himself, he's got to be the only person with eyes on the base. There was more than one sniper in this exercise. So he decides to wait until morning to approach because the enemy patrols are super active during the night. So he waits it out. He stays up in the tree because with his ghillie suit he knew he was hidden from anything on the ground. It's about 2 in the morning when he spots an enemy patrol coming through the woods. He can see the flashlights they had when suddenly he hears something hit the tree behind him. It sounded like a tree knock to him. He looks at the patrol and can see they had stopped advancing and have their weapons raised. He turns around in the tree, so he is now facing the direction the tree knock came from, and activates his night vision goggles, and can see 2 huge trees swaying from side to side. Then they stop, and he can see a tall, hairy figure coming down the hill toward the patrol. It lets out a roar and charges at the patrol. The patrol, scared shitless, hightailed it back to the base. In the morning, my friend climbs down the tree and sees huge footprints. He measures them to be approximately 16 inches long and 5 inches wide. Then he heads back to the base and completes the exercise. And that was his encounter. Today's 5th encounter. For a little bit of background, I am 71 years old. This happened in 2007, when I was still healthy and running for exercise. This occurred on a rubberized running track in a public park, within walking distance from where my wife and I used to live. The park's in a valley, actually the lowest point in Canton, Ohio, surrounded on 3 sides by a wooded area. When you're on the track, a person is approximately 300 yards from the nearest public street, which is an elevated street separated from the surrounding area. For some perspective, the oval track is a little over 3 miles in distance. A creek runs through the center of the track. There are bridges over the creek at the south and north end of the track. There's also a small lagoon at the north end. There's a railroad track located at the extreme eastern edge of the park, running north to south. The railroad track is at the base of a steep hill, on top of which is the public street that I mentioned above. This took place on a practically bleak late March afternoon in 2007. which I remember as gloomy, cloudy, cold, and damp, and very depressing. Typical for that time of year here. Even though it was relatively early in the afternoon, perhaps 2 or 3, there was no one else using the park track that afternoon due to such foul weather. I was on the west side of the track running southward when I noticed something coming towards me in the distance, something low to the ground, unopposed to standing upright in the likeness of a person. The subject seemed to be moving toward me at about the same pace that I was running toward it. It wasn't actually on the track, but in the grass beside the track. As the gap closed between us, I began to see clearly that it was some type of animal. As it drew near, I determined it was a very large dog. At this point, I became concerned because dogs and runners are not a good mix. Now, closer, perhaps 150 yards, I could see that it was not a dog but 2 dogs, each about the size of a typical German shepherd. I stopped and watched these animals approaching. They weren't acting like dogs are supposed to act. I know dogs very well. My wife and I were breeders and handlers of show dogs, English settlers in the 70s. And I can't remember a time when we didn't own a dog. I know how dogs are supposed to look, and I am quite familiar with dog mannerisms. Something was not natural as far as these were concerned. They were moving as if they were imitating a running motion. Usually dogs will sniff the grass or trees when they run, investigating everything within range. Also, dogs do not canter, and they certainly don't canter simultaneously in perfect lockstep. These creatures were cantering faster than a trot but slower than a gallop, precisely in step with each other, and they were looking straight ahead, never looking to either side, up or down, never deviating from this bizarre behavior. Their general appearance can best be described as artificial. One was shades of gray, the other shades of brown. The hair was entirely too colorful, too thick, too shiny, almost synthetic looking. Additionally, the body parts seemed not in proper proportion to each other. The dogs seemed to be physically identical, like twins or clones. Their faces lacked expression, no tongues hanging out, no panting. Mouths were neatly closed. By this time I was no longer concerned about being bit. These things were totally oblivious to my presence. I turned and watched them canter past me at a distance of 6 feet or so, and proceed northward along the side of the track until they were out of sight. I have not seen them again. I go to the park every day, weather permitting, and I always look for them. I haven't seen anything even remotely resemble those dogs in the following years since that dreary March afternoon. Am I suggesting that these were robotic dogs? No, I don't think they were robotic, although that opinion is not entirely outside the realm of possibilities. Please don't misunderstand me. I am certainly not suggesting these creatures are genuinely artificial. I never thought that for a moment, that these were not living biological beings of some type. I've used terms like artificial and synthetic to illustrate the strangeness of the sighting. I'm not suggesting that I encountered some sort of android animal. You may be thinking that I'm suggesting something unique about this specific location, perhaps something mysterious or paranormal about the local park or track. I'm not suggesting any such thing. As far as I'm concerned, these incidents occurred at this park track simply by pure coincidence and in accordance with known laws of probability. I speak in terms of probability because I am now feeling confident that this kind of thing is common occurrence and not fantasy or illusion, and certainly not a myth. Not only is it common today, but I also believe it has been occurring for many years, possibly thousands of years. It is a genuine experience, an observable phenomenon, and therefore objective to the laws of probability and, hopefully, someday, to scientific scrutiny. Over the period of perhaps 20 years, I've spent a substantial amount of time in the same locale. I think the probability of these incidents occurring in my presence in the park is likely about the same chance of this mysterious activity happening elsewhere, in a mall, restaurant, a neighborhood, and just about any other public place. What confuses me is the apparent inability of the creatures of these entities to successfully duplicate even the most basic human characteristics, such as walking as human would normally walk, or, in the case of animal replication, running as an animal would naturally run, and behave as an animal would normally behave. To put this into simplest terms, they, whoever they are, cannot be exceedingly bright if they are essentially unable to produce a convincing human or canine reproduction. Today's final encounter. So back in early 2015, a group of friends and I had a party at a friend's house. We were all underage, and most of the people there were either military or joining the military. So we, being dumb teenagers that we are at the time, decided drinking out on the roof would be cool as shit. So me and one of my buddies decided to climb up there, and we were sitting there drinking our brews and just shooting the shit. Well, about an hour of sitting there, we hear something bellowing in the woods. For context, the house sat out in a field. If you're looking at the front porch, there was a big pond to your right about 100 yards away, and then farmland and woods around the rest of the house. Well, we hear this sound coming from the woods directly behind the pond. My buddy says it might be a cow or maybe a dog running around, but I wasn't too sure. My family owns a farm, so I knew what cows sound like, and everyone knows what most dogs sound like. This sounded like some guy with a super deep voice was out in the woods going, "Ooh-wah, ooh-wah." Best way I could make it sound. So this goes on for about 10 minutes or so, and we're just talking about what it could be. Suddenly it screams, and before I couldn't call that a scream, but this was just putting its entire gut into it and screaming at the top of its lungs. We're drunk as shit at this point, so when it did that, it surprised the hell out of us and made me jump, which made me slide off the roof. After we got situated again, we could hear this thing just thrashing through the brush like it was hitting and kicking everything. My buddy and I were just stunned listening to this thing. Next thing we know, we hear a tree cracking and slowly falling over. So I said, screw this, I'm getting the dudes with guns. So I run inside and tell everyone what's going on, and they run outside, weapons locked, loaded. We're sitting and listening. Absolutely nothing. Not a sound could be heard. Fortunately, they believe us and said they'd go out and look the next morning for the tree that fell. So we get up the next morning, hungover as shit, grab some guns and head out. We walked around for a couple of minutes, and it's a forest, so there's broken trees everywhere. We figure we're not going to know which one it was, so we just start meandering around. We end up finding this broken tree trunk, and it's still green around the bark, so we figure this must be it. Thing is, the tree's about 12 to 13 inches in diameter. So we just said this must be it, since it's the freshest looking tree, and headed out of there. I haven't really had any Sasquatch experiences before, but I have always looked back on that and always said it must have been a Squatch really having a shitty day. I just can't think of anything else it could have been, because the biggest animal we have around here are black bear, and I doubt a black bear can push over a healthy tree as big as the one we saw. We assume this was. This isn't proof of Bigfoot, it's really sort of a, I don't know, story to share with y'all. Alright, screw it. Just one more encounter before we end the upload. I was a young Coast Guard guardsman, about 21 years old back in '81. Our boat was the Coast Guard cutter Sumac, stationed out of St. Louis, Missouri, foot of Iron Street. It wasn't a cutter, it was a river-going tugboat with a buoy tender barge on the front of a buoy operation, red nuns and black cans. At the time of the incident, we were heading back up the river to St. Louis from a week of setting buoys starting at the Ohio River. What a fun job that was. Back-breaking, but a good workout for a young man like myself. When we finished our daily aids to navigation ops for the day, we'd simply push the barge into a bank, tie off to a big tree for overnight makeshift mooring. A group of us would always leave the boat for a couple of hours and explore the area for anything unusual, or more often lonely women looking for a fling on the coastie. The last place we were moored was next to a railroad track leading to and from St. Louis on the Missouri side, probably 20 to 30 miles south of St. Louis. We put down the gagway and strode about onto a woodsy land, about 4 of us. There were river bluffs beyond the railroad tracks and what looked like a few caves for us to explore. It was otherwise inaccessible from anywhere but the railroad tracks and the river. We walked about 200 feet into a meadow or hollow that abused a cave when we heard an ear-piercing scream from our left. It was so loud we just froze in place. It was directed at us. One of my shipmates said it must have been a screech owl, but I've listened to recordings of screech owls since then, and that scream was no screech owl. It was guttural and booming, bone-chilling loud, so much so that we could feel it inside of our bodies. We turned around and went back to the boat. The scream unnerved us. I didn't know anything about Sasquatches or cryptids back then. I believe now that we heard something, some Sasquatch vocalization, that we had happened onto a Bigfoot lair in that cave system just south of St. Louis, Missouri. And I'll bet they still use that cave to this day. It provides a great hideout for them, as it's completely cut off from any human trespassing except by boat. Nah, just one more, guys. How about this? A little bonus, a treat. I feel like shit today, so I really don't want to stop. Something unusual I experienced with a friend in southeast Ohio, Hocking Hills area. This happened to me around February of 2020. I was spending the weekend with a good friend of mine that I've known for a long time. Me and him were at his older brother's house for the night. To give you some context, his brother's house sits at the bottom of a large holler, completely surrounded by nothing but the neighbors' houses just up the hill and a thick Ohio forestry. We set up our PS4 and TV in the basement of the house for the night. After a few hours of playing games, it was already midnight. My friend and I were sitting on the futon with the TV in front of us, and in the upper right-hand corner of the basement, there's a large white back door that faces the woods. This door has small windows through it that were sanctioned between each other like checkerboard. Just above the door was the outer side, a small light that was only just bright enough to see a few feet in front of you. I wasn't paying any attention to the door when this happened, as I was probably playing the game or Instagram or something, but out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly saw what I thought was a completely white animal throwing its own body into the door with a thunderous and alarming force. It literally nearly ripped the door off its hinges, and whatever it was quickly ran back wherever it came from, as me and my friend searched around outside, and only to find small scratch marks on the door. Surprisingly, at the time, I wasn't initially too creeped out by this. I genuinely believed it was just an animal, like one of the chickens that they had in the yard had gotten out. The coop was being chased by a fox or something like that, but as I thought about it, I don't think a 10-pound bird had the physical capacity to do what this thing just did to a heavy door. Plus, the little I had seen of the creature was more dog-like than anything, although I did not distinguish any significant features of the creature, only the outline of a pale white body. If I had to roughly guess, this thing was no longer than 4 feet long. Wow, what an upload. A white Dogman throwing itself at a door. That's friggin' creepy. And in Ohio, nonetheless. As of late, I've had a lot of encounters coming from Ohio. I always knew Ohio was a hotbed, like Pennsylvania, Mississippi, Georgia, a lot of places actually. I don't really think there is not a place in America or the lower 48, screw it, let's include Alaska, that isn't a hotbed for these creatures, whatever they are. Whether it be Dogman, Sasquatch, who knows? And one of these experiences in today's upload, I feel, is proof that the government, or whatever you have it, is cloning some of these things to really screw with the public's perception. I mean, what's best to, clone something so stupid and say, oh yeah, we just did experiments, just forget about, these things don't exist, but they were just our experiments. I don't know. It's just me thinking. Anyway, sorry if you guys didn't like this upload. I really needed to record today. I really messed up in the head about my dad and everything. Shit's not going good for him, so I don't know. Anyway, have a great day, guys. See ya.